The marble steps of the Supreme Court of the United States shimmered in the morning sun, but inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Never before in modern American history had a sitting president been summoned to appear before the highest court in the land, not as a petitioner, not for a ceremonial visit, but as a direct respondent in a historic and volatile constitutional battle. Donald J. Trump, the 47th President of the United States, walked into the courtroom like a man on a mission. His signature red tie hung long, the American flag pin gleamed on his lapel, and his expression was a mix of unshakable confidence and fiery determination. Seated at the center of the bench was Chief Justice John Roberts, his face unusually grim. The case at hand, United States versus Trump, a case that challenged the very nature of presidential authority. The lawsuit, originally filed by a bipartisan group of legislators, accused the president of overstepping constitutional limits by issuing an executive order that dissolved certain federal judicial oversight mechanisms, citing national emergency powers during a post-crisis reconstruction. But the real powder keg wasn't the legalese. It was what Trump did next. "This is a witch hunt," Trump declared, standing from his chair before his attorney could even speak. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. The President of the United States was about to argue his own case, and no one, not even his legal team, expected it. "Mr. President," Chief Justice Roberts interjected, eyebrows raised. "This is highly irregular. The court recognizes. You'll recognize that this country's been hijacked by activist judges for decades," Trump interrupted, his voice booming. "And I'm here to put an end to it. Right here, right now." Justice Sonia Sotomayor leaned over toward Roberts, whispering urgently. Justice Brett Kavanaugh adjusted his glasses. The court had seen unexpected arguments before, but never a full frontal verbal blitz from a sitting president against its own Chief Justice. Cameras were off by court protocol, but the moment had already gone viral through leaks from insiders, clips recorded secretly by aides, and audio picked up by a rogue reporter's pen. Mic hashtags like hashtag #TrumpSCOTUS Showdown and hashtag Roberts Silenced were trending within minutes. Chief Justice Roberts tried again. "Mr. President, the court has not granted you the floor. Your counsel, I am the counsel," Trump shot back, stepping forward. "The American people didn't elect me to hide behind lawyers. They elected me to tell the truth." Roberts was silent for a moment, as if recalculating the path of history in his mind. Then, in a decision that would ripple through every law school and news outlet in the nation for decades, he said, "Proceed." The room froze. Justice Elena Kagan closed her legal pad. Clarence Thomas leaned back with quiet intrigue. Neil Gorsuch folded his hands. And Trump began. He didn't cite legal precedents. He didn't quote the Constitution line by line. Instead, he told a story, one of a country he claimed had been slowly taken hostage by bureaucracy, judicial activism, and entrenched political interests. He painted himself as the people's warrior, the only one bold enough to walk into the lion's den and roar. "You all had your turn," he said, looking at Roberts. "For years, you sat behind this bench and watched this country rot from the inside out. You let it happen. You let it burn." Roberts remained stoic, but those who knew him well could see a flicker behind his eyes. A calculation. A warning. And then Trump crossed a line. "You, John Roberts, are no Chief Justice. You're the chief of cover-ups. You sat silent while they spied on me in 2020. You sat silent when states ignored their own constitutions. And now you think you'll sit here in judgment of me?" Roberts opened his mouth, but no words came out. The courtroom held its breath. And in that moment, a surreal, televised, American history-shifting moment, John Roberts was truly silenced. The courtroom was frozen in a silence so thick you could hear the hum of the ceiling lights. John Roberts, the 17th Chief Justice of the United States, had no rebuttal, at least not yet. His silence, though only seconds long, felt like a vacuum of power. And Trump seized it. "You want to know why the people are angry?" Trump continued, pacing in front of the podium now like a lion let loose in a cathedral. "Because they voted. They believed. And every time they try to change this broken system, this court tells them, sorry, not constitutional." He turned directly toward the bench as locked with Roberts. "But let me ask you, John, who checks you? Who checks this bench when it decides that boys can compete in girls' sports, that rioters are mostly peaceful, that the FBI can spy on a campaign without consequences? Who checks you?" Roberts' lips finally parted. "The Constitution." "Exactly," Trump roared. "And I am the only one in this room who was elected to protect it by the people themselves." Reporters outside were scrambling, phones buzzing with updates. Every major network had turned their homepage into a live update ticker. Protesters and supporters gathered outside the courthouse like storm clouds, flags waving, signs rising high, chanting growing louder by the minute. Inside, the drama reached new heights. Justice Sotomayor broke the tension. Mr. President, if we allow the executive branch to invalidate judicial review whenever it deems it inconvenient, we no longer have 3 branches of government, we have 1. Trump turned to her. With all due respect, Justice Sotomayor, this court has already been acting like a 4th branch, unelected, unaccountable, and unchecked. You say I'm a threat to balance. But you all became the balance breakers a long time ago. Kavanaugh interjected now, more measured. Mr. President, if this court rules against your executive orders, will you abide by that decision? Trump didn't flinch. If this court actually abides by the Constitution and not political agendas? Yes. But if you think I'm going to bow to a ruling that was predetermined in backroom deals, you've got another thing coming. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Kavanaugh raised an eyebrow. Are you accusing this court of corruption? Trump stepped back to the center. I'm saying the American people already know what the ruling's going to be. The question is, are you brave enough to prove them wrong? It was at that moment that Roberts finally leaned forward. His voice came low, even, but with ice under the surface. You came here to challenge the Supreme Court, Mr. President. You came here with fire in your lungs and fury in your words. But remember this, you do not command this court. You are subject to it. Trump gave a slight nod. And yet here I am. Not just a subject, but the man who's finally daring to look the court in the eye and say you're not above the Constitution either. Justice Amy Coney Barrett glanced at her notes, then at Roberts. Perhaps we should move to formal arguments. But the momentum had shifted. This wasn't just a courtroom anymore. This was a battlefield of ideologies where robes met rallies and gavels met grassroots. Trump took one last step toward the bench. Make your ruling. Let the American people see what justice really looks like. But know this, whatever you decide today, history will remember that I stood here and said what millions were afraid to. And then, in a stunning move, he walked away from the podium without waiting for a response. The courtroom sat stunned. The President of the United States had just dropped the mic on the highest court in the land. Outside, the energy was electric. Protesters chanted. Supporters wept and cheered. Helicopters circled above like buzzards. Every American watching knew this was more than a case, it was a reckoning. Back inside, John Roberts sat frozen, a blank stare on his face. For the first time in his judicial career, he wasn't sure what the court's opinion should be. As the courtroom emptied, the media went into overdrive. Pundits on every network scrambled to interpret what had just happened. MSNBC called it a constitutional crisis in real time. Fox News hailed it as Trump's finest hour. Twitter was a battlefield. But what came next? No one saw coming. That night, under the veil of secrecy, Chief Justice John Roberts gathered with the other justices for a private conference. Phones were confiscated. Security was tightened. What was said in that chamber was meant to remain there forever. But just before midnight, an encrypted email arrived in the inboxes of 2 prominent journalists. It was marked confidential. Attached, a transcript of the Supreme Court's internal deliberations, complete with heated exchanges, Roberts' doubts, and private critiques of Trump's behavior. The source was anonymous. The leak was explosive. Within hours, the story broke. Breaking, Supreme Court in disarray, leaked transcript reveals justices question legitimacy of Trump's order, disagree over how to respond. Justice Kagan had reportedly said, if we strike this down, he'll turn the public against us permanently. Justice Alito countered, that's not our concern. Our job is to interpret the law, not appease a president. Even Roberts was quoted as saying, I don't know if we can contain the political fallout this time. The nation erupted. In the days that followed, Trump weaponized the leak. At rallies across swing states, he thundered into microphones. They weren't deliberating justice, folks. They were deliberating damage control. He played clips from the transcript like a rock band plays its greatest hits. His bass grew louder. His opposition became more desperate. Meanwhile, inside the court, panic set in. For the first time in American history, the Supreme Court faced an internal investigation into one of its own. Who leaked the document? Was it a clerk? A justice? A planted mole? CNN speculated that Roberts himself had authorized a controlled leak to gauge public reaction, a theory that gained traction when a former clerk went on air, suggesting Roberts was deeply shaken by Trump's courtroom confrontation. The term Roberts silenced wasn't just a headline anymore. It became a meme, a protest sign, a chant. College students wore it on hoodies. Conservative influencers turned it into merchandise. Even late-night comedians jumped in. But in the White House, Trump was preparing his final move. He called a national address demanding the Supreme Court recuse itself from the case, citing institutional bias and proven misconduct. It was unprecedented. It was dangerous. It was vintage Trump. This court has proven it is no longer impartial, he declared, standing in front of a backdrop of American flags. It is infected, corrupted, and the people no longer trust it. Democrats were apoplectic. Legal scholars were stunned. Constitutional experts flooded news channels, calling the speech an open declaration of war on judicial independence. And then came the kicker. I am invoking Article 2 powers granted to me by the Constitution, Trump said, his voice slow and deliberate. Until this court clears its internal crisis and restores public faith, its rulings on this matter will not be recognized by this administration. Silence. America had never heard a president say those words. Across the nation, the line between branches blurred. And the Supreme Court, once revered as untouchable, was now a contested battlefield in the war for America's soul. In Washington, D.C., Roberts stared at the flag outside his chambers. His face, once so certain, was now marked by hesitation. He had spent his entire life guarding the dignity of the institution. Now, he wasn't even sure if it could survive the week. One thing was clear. Donald Trump had dragged the Supreme Court into the political arena and left no path for retreat. 2 weeks had passed since Donald Trump's explosive showdown in the Supreme Court chamber, and the country was barely holding it together. Red states had rallied behind Trump's call to resist the court. Governors from Texas, Florida, and Oklahoma declared that they would not abide by any ruling from a compromised institution. Meanwhile, blue states pushed back, filing emergency motions to the lower courts demanding judicial continuity and even proposing a new judicial compact. A temporary alliance of legal cooperation to counteract what they called Trump's constitutional insurrection. Protests broke out everywhere, some peaceful, some not. National Guard troops were deployed in 5 states. Washington, D.C. had been placed under a special security alert. All eyes were now back on the Supreme Court building, waiting for a verdict. Inside, the justices were divided. John Roberts, usually a master of forging consensus, found himself lost in ideological warfare. His majority was gone. His moral authority had evaporated with the leak. I've never seen him this rattled, Justice Gorsuch confided to a clerk. He's second-guessing every word in his opinion draft. The case had forced the justices to take sides, not just politically, but constitutionally. At stake was the validity of Trump's executive order, which had granted sweeping emergency powers to override federal court rulings in what he had called post-crisis reconstruction zones. Justice Alito and Thomas stood firm on one side. The Constitution gives the executive wide discretion in emergencies, Thomas wrote in his draft opinion. We are not here to babysit the president. On the other end, Justice Sotomayor's dissent was fiery. This is how republics crumble, she warned. One man declares himself immune from oversight, and we hand him the pen. Roberts had the swing vote and the final say. But he was no longer sure what he believed. His instincts told him to preserve the court's authority. But the public outrage, the leaks, the fear of violence, they weighed on him like never before. He spent hours walking the Supreme Court's empty halls, replaying Trump's courtroom words in his mind. You let it happen. You let it burn. He hadn't been able to answer then. Could he now? And then came the final twist. Just 24 hours before the ruling was to be announced, a second leak hit the newswire. This time, it wasn't from inside the court, but from a federal intelligence agency. The leak revealed that Trump's executive order had been drafted months before the national emergency he cited as its justification. It also exposed a secret internal memo showing that several top White House legal advisors had warned against it, calling it legally indefensible. The bombshell shattered everything. Liberal pundits shouted, "We told you so." Conservative media scrambled to redirect focus. Congress issued a bipartisan statement urging calm and order in the coming days. But for Roberts, the leak was a gift wrapped in fire. He rewrote his opinion overnight. The morning of the ruling, the Supreme Court chamber was packed tighter than ever. The air was dry. No one knew which way it would go. Roberts, looking more solemn than ever, read the decision. Today, the court reaffirms that no branch of government, executive, legislative, or judicial, is above the Constitution. The powers granted by Article 2 do not extend beyond the realm of judicial review. We therefore find the executive order unconstitutional. The courtroom was silent. Outside, a mix of cheers and jeers erupted like twin explosions. Roberts looked straight ahead, not at Trump's legal team, not at the cameras, but into history itself. He had spoken. Finally. But even then, the silence that had once defined the Chief Justice still lingered in the air. Because everyone knew. The ruling might have won the legal battle, but it may have lost the country's faith in the system. The ruling rippled through America like a political earthquake. Some called it justice. Others called it judicial overreach. And Donald Trump? He called it a betrayal. Roberts caved to the pressure. Trump thundered at a rally in Phoenix that night. He chose the swamp over the people. But mark my words, we're not done. The crowd roared back, USA! 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 The president then dropped a bombshell. I'm filing a motion to have Chief Justice John Roberts impeached for judicial misconduct and for presiding over a court infected with partisan leaks and corruption. Gasps spread across the country. Never in U.S. history had a sitting president called for the removal of a Chief Justice. Meanwhile, Roberts returned to his chambers in the early hours of the morning. The decision had been made. The opinion signed. But inside he felt hollow. He turned off the news and opened a handwritten letter left on his desk by one of the court's senior clerks. History won't remember your silence that day. It'll remember your final words. You did what you had to do. Sleep well, sir. But sleep was a distant concept for the Chief Justice. 1 month later, Washington had become a pressure cooker. Congress was embroiled in hearings over Trump's impeachment request against Roberts. Partisan lines were deeply drawn. The House Judiciary Committee became a daily drama with legal scholars, former judges, and even ex-justices testifying. Yet behind the scenes, something darker brewed. An anonymous whistleblower leaked another piece of evidence, this time from inside the Trump campaign, revealing that the Supreme Court clash had been strategically planned months in advance. The legal fight, the executive order, the media blitz, it was all part of a massive 2024 campaign play. Emails showed aides describing the showdown as a chance to paint Trump as the last defender of the Constitution. One even said, "Let Roberts speak, then break him." America loves a fight. The leak didn't just shock the public. It shocked Trump's own party. Senator Mike Gallagher from Wisconsin took to the Senate floor. This wasn't about saving the country. It was about staging a fight, breaking the courts, and consolidating power. I can't stand by anymore. It was the crack in the dam. Suddenly, Republicans began pulling support from Trump's judicial impeachment plan. Independent voters turned cold. Protests on both sides fizzled into uncertainty. Even conservative justices quietly distanced themselves. But Trump? He pushed forward harder. I did what had to be done. I challenged a rigged system. I stood in the belly of the beast and made them blink. Yet, the beast didn't blink. It bit back. 6 months later, November 2025. The midterms came and went. The political landscape was a war zone of scorched trust and shattered alliances. Trump's party lost 30 House seats. Senate flipped. And while Trump remained in office, he was now a president surrounded by enemies, cornered, but still dangerous. John Roberts, meanwhile, made a surprise announcement on live television. "I will not be resigning," he said calmly, "but I am requesting the formation of a new bipartisan judicial ethics commission, the first of its kind, to restore public faith in the highest court of this nation." And in a move no one expected, he invited Donald Trump himself to nominate 2 independent legal scholars to the panel. In his next press conference, Trump smiled. "I'll play ball," he said, "but I'm not done. 2028's coming." Epilogue, the history book entry. Years later, students in classrooms across America would study the Supreme Court showdown of 2025. They would read about the president who challenged the highest court, the Chief Justice who stood silent, then spoke with fire, the nation that almost came apart, and the day when politics, law, and power collided in a courtroom, and the echo of that collision shaped America's democracy forever.